Okay, so June 7th, you have an email that says, Jason, I'm in receipt of this, it's Exhibit 2. I consider the misconduct insubordination. I expect compliance with a complete and prompt response to my directive. Did you have an obligation at that point to notify him that he was the subject of an internal affairs investigation for insubordination?
No,
Why not?
because he was not the subject of an internal affairs investigation at that point.
Right, because you were basically doing it without calling it that. If you're investigating someone for insubordination, don't you think in the police business that's something that's done in the context of an internal affairs investigation?
No, not always.
No?
No.
Never here?
No.
Okay, and your experience elsewhere? Have you only worked here?
No, I've worked other places, but
Okay,
no,
where else have you worked?
I worked in New Hampshire.
As a police officer?
Yeah.
What department?
I worked in Lee, I worked in Rollinsford.
So if a police officer is being investigated for insubordination and the employer decides he was insubordinate, does the employer have a basis for discipline?
Yes, yeah, at some point, and you have to make sure that you're following contractual obligations, but sometimes, and I'll give you an example of insubordination where there's no investigation. A sergeant tells an officer to do something and they just clearly just didn't do it, they walk away from it. That's insubordination. There's no need to declare an IA and then go through a process of saying it's an IA. It's an investigation, but it's not an IA. And there's definitely
Internal affairs investigations give employees certain rights and benefits, right?
Yes, they do.
What's the difference between an internal affairs investigation and not an internal affairs investigation from the perspective of the employee and the rights they may be otherwise entitled to?
The employee has more rights with if you declare, according to our contract, if they're subject to a complaint from the outside, the external, then they have to be provided notification.
Okay. So you could have, at any point, initiated your internal affairs investigation.
Yes.
You chose to do it on June 28th, right? And up until June 28th, you had already conducted a lot of your investigation.
That's correct.
So you already had a lot of it done, and the people you were interviewing, did they know that there was a pending internal affairs investigation?
There was,
There wasn't one, right?
right, the internal affairs investigation
Began
began after that.
June 28th. And who was the complainant in the internal affairs investigation?
So there was no complainant.
Okay. Well, somebody initiated it because of a complaint.
I did.
You did, right. You,
Doesn't make me the complainant, but I initiated it, yes.
okay. You believed that an employee of yours had been dishonest to you.
I've been dishonest, yeah.
To you.
Not just to me,
Including to you.
including to me, correct?
Okay, we can do this all night, but you believed to some degree he was dishonest to you and that you investigated this alleged dishonesty. Yes?
Yes.
Did you have the opportunity, if you chose to have an outside investigation conducted?
Sure,
You chose not to do that.
correct.
And why?
Because there was no need to.
How much would it have cost for an outside investigation?
I don't know, it wasn't about money.
Are you aware of outside investigations that happen all the time around Connecticut for police departments?
I'm
And
aware
Friday.
that outside investigations happen.
Would you know who to call?
Sure.
Who would you call?
Well, I would first.
Who does it? Who doesn't?
I want to object, he's not even letting the witness answer the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I have a police commission that I can counsel with, as well as a town manager. So that would be my first step.
Name one or more people or entities in Connecticut that you know conduct outside investigations for police departments.
I'm going to object, that is completely irrelevant, whether he can name someone or not. He's already testified.
He just named
could have
someone.
done it.
You already answered the question.
Well, let's just
Okay.
move on and answer, so that
So you could
question's
have called
been
Eric Daigle, right? He's in the business of conducting investigations for police departments, right?
Yes.
Okay. At the actual interview, when you were questioning Jason, when you disagreed with his answer, didn't you say, no, Jason, I was there, this is what I said to you. Kind of removing yourself from the context of the questioner and putting yourself in the context of a witness, right? We had this happen on more than one time. You've got the transcript attached. And we even stop at one point because I say, I don't understand, sir. You seem to be the witness, the complainant, right?
Yes, I remember.
We had that conversation.
Yes.
Did you then think, look, maybe for, I don't believe I'm a biased investigator, but for the sake of the appearance of impropriety, we should refer this out?
No.
Did you have that opportunity still at that point?
Yes.
And why did you not want to do that?
Because I didn't feel that it was necessary.
So you believe, I guess from reading all of this, you believe that Jason lied to you.
Jason lied.
To you. You don't want to say that part, but that's...
No, he lied
He
to me.
lied
but
to
I-
you.
But I don't want you to say that he just lied to me.
But you concluded he lied to you. You
I
began the
concluded he
investigation.
was dishonest with
You gotta
several.
let him answer.
Yeah.
I appreciate what you're trying to do, but you have to let him answer the question.
I concluded he was dishonest with several,
Okay,
including me.
including you. The basis of beginning it was you believed he was dishonest to you.
No, it wasn't just me. I wasn't the only one that was in the room and interviewed.
Do you have any police officers here where there has been a finding or a conclusion that they've been dishonest and untruthful, yet they're still employed?
Not that I'm aware of.
You know, I wrote down some of the things you said. I felt dishonesty was a major problem. I conducted the investigation. I concluded he should be terminated. There's only one guy involved in any of this, right? It's just you.
Am I supposed to answer that?
So it's just a statement of fact. I mean, I don't know how you disagree with it, right? You have other people helping you with the investigation?
Yes.
Writing your report for you?
No.
You wrote your report yourself?
Yes, I did.
What was Jason's, did you tell him that he had been improving in his productivity, this midnight shift business that you had disciplined him for?
Yes.
And so when you found areas that were in need of improvement, he understood and he improved?
Yes.
At the time of all of these events, including the speaking to Jason about performance, about the grievance, about the dishonesty, was Jason union official here?
Was he a union official? here?
Yes.
Yes.
What role or capacity?
Vice president.
And what are the rules and expectations of an employer for taking retaliatory action against someone who's involved in union conduct?
Well, they have the option of filing,
What would they file?
file an MPV,
And what's that?
prohibited municipal action or
Municipal
practice.
prohibited practice.
Yeah.
Because the employer is not allowed to act inappropriately towards a member of the union governing body in a manner inconsistent with the directives of the employer. You can't do something to a union board member that might quell or quash or lessen their rigor in fulfilling their union obligations.
Counselor, are you assuming that being a union officer makes you exempt from any discipline?
No, but it certainly makes you exempt from retaliatory conduct.
That's a
Because that's
different-
right, you can discipline union officials if they've done something wrong, but you can't do it because they're a union official any more than you would if they were just a regular employee. I think we've established that now, right? You have a
And since-
disagreement?
Do you want to weigh in on that?
I would not dispute, this isn't an MPP, but I wouldn't dispute that is the prescription. Not what Attorney Mann originally said, but what he has clarified in terms of it's retaliation that's prohibited by the statute.
We all good on that?
Yes,
Good. All right.
yes. Did you say anything negative about Officer Morano?
I don't think I did.
So why would you be worried about him saying you did? I mean, you knew you didn't say anything, right?
I'm not worried about him saying anything.
So are you saying now you never say anything negative about Officer Morano?
No, I'm saying I don't recall saying anything negative about Officer Morano. But I'm not worried about him saying something about that.
Well, you seem worried about it because you asked everybody about it.
Yeah, because that being said to people, it's causing discontent and low morale, and it's not good for us.
This is a pretty polarizing event here at the Simsbury Police Department, right? How many members, what's the size of this organization?
It's 4938 sworn.
Okay. When's the last time a spectacle like this ever happened here?
Prior to the former chief.
Prior to the former chief?
First of all, this is a hearing, it's not a spectacle.
Right.
Okay, so.
Does an employee have the right to tape a conversation they have with you?
I believe it is somewhat questionable whether they have the right to.
Okay, and the basis for that conclusion is what, sir?
The basis to that is that we have developed trust here, and it's not right. It's some could be viewed as unethical to that. By law, are they allowed to? Yes.
Okay, so,
And do we have an order that specifically says, no, that you cannot? No, we don't.
have you now gone around and asked anybody else if they record you? Have you issued a directive,
No,
don't record me?
no,
Is there something wrong with taking notes about conversations they have with you?
no.
Do you think that an employee might feel a tiny bit uncomfortable when their boss says, are you writing notes about me?
Sure. I have no objection to anybody writing notes.
Right, but do you think that an employee, like you're an employee, right? You work for somebody,
Yes.
okay? Your employer says to you, Chief, things aren't going great. Just gave you a negative evaluation. Do you have any notes that you've written about any of this? Let's assume it's the exact same scenario. Let's assume that it's you, and your employer says to you, have you recorded any of this?
And we're going to assume that I said no and then I said yes?
Yeah. We're going to assume that you were reluctant to tell your employer that you were recording them in any sense. Don't you think you'd feel a little bit uncomfortable telling your employer, I've been recording you, boss?
No, I can't put myself in that position.
Okay. Is Jason involved in any high-profile cases currently? Or has he been involved in any high-profile cases that are currently pending?
He has, yeah, and he is, yeah.
Okay, which ones in particular?
I believe that the 2014 homicide is still pending.
Okay, what was his role in that case?
Investigate.
Had he contacted the state's attorney
No? About that?
about your, perceived findings here?
No.
plan to?
Depends.
On what?
Oh, it's gonna depend on how this goes. I have other things to do first. I mean, there's other notifications I would have to make as well if it's concluded that he is terminated or not terminated. There are things that I'm gonna have to do.
You
Notifications.
believe Jason Trombley to be a good police officer here, right, sir?
Yes.
Even when you found his performance slightly deficient for midnight shift supervising, he improved.
Yes, he did.
And now, you feel, or you've written, that you believe he's 100% tarnished because he lied, among others, to you about whether or not he took notes about you.
I'm objecting, there has been no evidence about other people lying.
I'm not saying other people are lying, maybe I spoke unclearly, but
Okay.
you believe that he lied to, among others, you.
Yes.
And you believe that the homicide that gained national notoriety, that is currently still pending, will be impacted by your conclusions and findings here?
It could be. And that's up to the prosecutor and the courts to decide.
You don't have any officers here who you thought to be untruthful and dishonest to you?
I don't have any that I have deemed untruthful and dishonest.
Okay. Is that because you chose not to deem them untruthful and dishonest, but you could have?
No, I can't think of any. And I
Well,
can't-
tell me about Tim Russell.
Objection.
Tell me about Tim Russell and allegations.
There is an objection, there's no question. Tell me about Tim Russell. Do you have a question specific for the witness?
Tell me about Tim Russell's complaint and whether you found it to be true or false.
I'm going to object. What complaint are we referring to?
He probably knows. If he says he doesn't know, he can say that.
Okay.
So Chief, do you know what he's talking about?
I believe I know what he's
Okay.
talking about.
Well, then-
So go ahead, sir.
So what would you like to know about that?
What was the complaint he made, and did you find it to be truthful or untruthful?
So the complaint was a hostile work environment, and I found that there was not enough reason to show that it was a hostile work environment.
What was the basis of the hostility? What was the act that the officer thought had happened that he took to be hostile?
The officer was fearful because of the action of a supervisor, what the supervisor did.
With a gun?
Yes, with a
Can
gun.
he answer the question first before you jump in? I'm really going to object. This is repetitive.
Oh, it's definitely not
I mean, if
repetitive.
he wants to testify, he should take the witness stand. Otherwise, you should let the witness testify.
Okay, let's try to follow that rule, and then we won't have these objections. Are you good with that?
Of course.
Okay, let's do it that way then.
He made a complaint.
Yes, he did.
Did you find it to be not true?
I wasn't able to find it that it happened. It wasn't that it was not true or true. The finding was that the facts happened the way they were.
Okay. Let's
But nobody was deemed truthful or untruthful.
So let's ask this question. If you had wanted to, could you have investigated the truthfulness of the complaint?
I investigated the complaint, or the complaint was investigated as much as it possibly could have
If
been.
someone makes a false complaint, you familiar with progressive discipline?
Yes, I have.
What is progressive discipline?
Well, when you can, depending on what the either violation is or incident, you start off in the lowest possible form of discipline, and then with repetition or more severity, you go further up.
Besides the written warning that we've already sort of belabored a while here, did Jason have other discipline?
Not recently.
Okay. Do you believe you have just cause to terminate Sergeant Trump?
Yes.
And you believe that you conducted a fair investigation?
Yes.
I have nothing further for you, sir. Thank you for bearing with me.
I have
Mr.
just
Harrington, do you have any?
a few follow-ups. Police chief, in your eyes, does an individual in this department get to lie multiple times for progressive discipline purposes?
No,
Are there certain infractions that merit immediate termination?
yes, there are.
And is lying in your mind one of them?
Yes, it is.
If, given the hypothetical that Attorney Ment gave you, if the town manager, for whatever reason, chose to ask you if you were keeping personal notes on her, do you believe you have a requirement to answer honestly?
Yes,
I think you testified, but I want to be clear. Once you learned that the metadata was either contaminated or destroyed, you did not look at the underlying documents that
On
Mr.
either-
Trombley gave you?
correct, on either thumb drive.
Okay. And if an officer takes personal notes, that's regarding an accident or scene, is it quite possible that those notes may be required to be produced at some point in time?
Yes, it is.
And is the only reason you asked for Mr. Trombley's recordings because he said that in his mind he had recorded you through the use of notes?
Yes, that's true.
If Mr. Trombley had never said that, would you ever have asked for his personal notes?
No.
Nothing further.
Do any of the commissioners have any questions for the witness? No.
That's been pretty thorough. So, good.
Okay, your next witness.
Yes. I'm going to next call Ed Kaczynski.
Just hold 1 second, I make sure that recorder's still.
Yes,
Do we have plenty of time on it?
Oh, it's got plenty of time.
All right.
No.
Attorney, do you need more water there?
Yeah, I get another order.
You get some.
Mr. Kuzinski, you solemnly swear or solemnly swear, sincerely affirm the case that might be that the evidence presented shall be the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Mr. Kaczynski, can you state your full name for the record?
Sure, my full name is Edwin L. Kaczynski Jr.
And where are you currently employed?
I am currently employed with the National Association of Government Employees and the International Brotherhood of Police Officers.
And how long have you been employed with, is that the union that represents police officers here in Simsbury?
Yes, it is.
And how long have you been employed with the union?
5.5 years.
And prior to that, what did you do for employment?
I served with the Cromwell Police Department 23 years, and after reaching 23 years, retired with the rank of captain.
Did you have a conversation with Jason Trombley on or about April 2nd, 2019?
Yes, I did.
Can you describe that conversation for us?
Yes. Not only was Sergeant Trombley there, but it was also Sergeant Cochran. And the meeting was over a recent written reprimand that they had received for deficiencies on the midnight shift.
Let me ask you this, because I don't want to get into your conversations about union business, but I want to ask a couple specific questions. During that meeting, did Mr. Trombley indicate that he had reported the police chief?
Yes, he had indicated that he had recorded conversations with the chief.
And what, do you recall what was the context or the conversation that led up to Mr. Trombley making that statement that he had recorded the police chief?
As stated, we were discussing their written reprimand and the things that were written in that. And one of the issues was an officer failure to respond to a call. And during that conversation of it, those officers on the midnight shift, Sergeant Trombley had indicated to me that the chief, he had recorded conversations with the chief, making disparaging remarks against Officers Russell and Morano, and something to the effect that they had, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't have the exact quote, that they had never been, wish he had never been hired here, and to the effect of that they would probably wanted them to leave the department.
So in that conversation that you had on April 2nd, it's your testimony that Mr. Trombley said that he had a recording of the police chief making some comment about Kevin Morano.
Sergeant Trombley's exact words, recorded conversation.
Recorded conversation.
I did not ask the specifics of it, when, how. All he said was recorded conversation, and I didn't ask any further questions on it.
But the point I just want to be clear is, Mr. Trombley had said that he had recorded the chief, whatever way he did that, of the chief making a comment about Kevin Morano.
And Tim Russell.
And Tim Russell. But Kevin Morano was one of the individuals listed.
That is correct.
Did you did you raise the issue about Kevin Morano, or did Mr. Trombley raise Mr. Morano's name, introduce Mr. Morano's name into the conversation?
It was Sergeant Trombley that brought up Officer Morano, because it was part of, like I said, our meeting on the written reprimand.
After you met with Mr. Trombley and Mr. Corcoran, right?
Yes.
Did you convey that conversation to anyone?
Yes, I met with the union president and vice president. The union president is Gary Gray. The union vice president is Sergeant Scott Sagan.
And when you met with Officer Gray and Sergeant Sagan, did you convey or report that Mr. Trombley had said that he had recorded the police chief?
Yes, that was part of the conversation.
Did you convey that, according to Mr. Trombley, he had a recording of the chief making a comment about Officer Morano?
I said Sergeant Trombley had recorded conversations regarding disparaging remarks that the chief made regarding Officers Morano and Officer Russell.
Now, you testified that you didn't specifically ask Mr. Sergeant Trombley about how he had recorded the chief, correct?
That is correct.
What was your understanding, given the context of the conversation, what the manner of those recordings were?
To be honest with you, I had no opinion. Due to today's technology and how things are done, I didn't ask, and my perception of how he did it at that point in time didn't matter. My concern was based upon what was written in here and the remarks and the potential for further discipline to other members of this union.
Did Mr. Trombley, during his conversation with you, ever make mention that he was using the word recording by reference to notes he had taken?
No.
Did he ever say he was using a tape recorder or anything like that?
No, and I did not ask.
Were you surprised to hear Mr. Trombley indicate that he had recordings of the police chief?
No.
Did there come a point in time when you yourself mentioned to Chief Boulder that Mr. Trombley had said that he had recorded him?
Yes, on two different occasions.
And you heard his testimony just a moment ago?
Yes.
Right there in the room?
Yes.
Was his testimony about the conversations he had with you, was that accurate?
To some degree, yes.
Was there, what degree?
At no point in time during my conversations with the chief did I ever mention the word tape, audio. All I said, and Sergeant Sagan and Officer Gray were in the room the first time, and then Officer Gray the second time, my specific comments were recorded conversations, and I even went into detail with the chief on what those recordings were.
Well, when you said you went into detail with what they were, when did you tell him what the recordings were?
I believe that was on the first meeting that I had with the chief on April 17th, and the disparaging remarks that were made. And then I asked specific questions regarding some of the deficiencies on the midnight shift, and if there would be any further discipline.
But during that conversation, did you discuss with him what form Mr. Trombley's recordings?
No, I did not.
Okay.
No, it was very specific.
Meaning the word recording was used.
Recorded conversations.
Right. And meaning you didn't have any better understanding of what that term meant as it was used by Mr. Trombley.
That is correct.
Nothing further.
Hi, Ed.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good, and you?
Good. You've had an opportunity to read the chief's report
Yes, I have.
where he summarizes you on page 2.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
The answer to that question is no. As I stated earlier, at no point during any of the meetings that I, say that it was on tape. All I said to the chief, as I had witnesses in the room, is that there was recorded conversation.
On page 13, in number 3, conclusions of fact.
I never said audio recordings.
So let's read number 3. On 3 separate occasions, is that part true?
Yes, I had 3 separate occasions, yes.
IBPO Rep. Ed Kaczynski told me that Sergeant Trombley had told him that he recorded conversations with me. Is that
Correct.
true?
That is true.
Now we have in parentheses, which he understood as audio recordings. Is that true?
That is not true.
That's untruthful.
That I
It's
did
an
not.
untruthful statement
That is correct.
by the police chief.
Correct, and I have 2 other supporting witnesses that were present during 2 of those conversations that can confirm that.
Is there any reason an employee can't take notes about their employment?
No, there isn't. I did it in my previous career as a captain.
Why?
For record-keeping purposes, to ensure whatever conversations took place, any directions or directives that I was given by my chief were written down, and I made sure that they were accurate and followed.
Did you, at the time you did that, think that your employer could ask you for them?
My personal notes? No.
Yeah. Why not?
Because they were just that, personal notes. They weren't taking in the function as a police officer.
Right, so you see a difference as, you're a captain, Cromwell Police Department,
Correct.
supervisory responsibilities,
Correct.
work your way up through the ranks.
Correct.
And it's your opinion that a person's personal notes on their computer at home
Correct.
are just that.
Correct.
And that an employee would have no reason to turn them over to the employer.
Correct. As I had a conversation with Jason when he was notified about his notes being turned over, my explanation to Jason on the notes is that if they were used in the course of your work, such as you asked earlier with, I believe it was the chief, on a motor vehicle accident, those notes, yes, could be subject to being turned over as a result of the investigation, whatever transpired after that.
I think my colleague asked that one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We'll give him the credit. But that's a true statement, because, right, if he had notes about an investigation he had done, or some outcome of a criminal case,
Yes,
those could be.
correct.
That's not the case here.
To the best of my knowledge, no.
So even if they were kept on the home computer, if they're related to police activity, you...
Not just police activity.
Just want to be clear what you're saying.
Sure.
So tell me what you're saying.
So, is an employee entitled to take, police officer, employee, entitled to take notes, in your opinion, based on your experience of more than 2 decades, including as a supervisor, is he entitled or she entitled to take notes about their employment?
Yes,
You did, in fact.
I did.
And if they pertain to an active investigation or a closed investigation, or a issuance of an infraction or an arrest of somebody or some kind of criminal investigation, might they be disclosable?
Yes,
In the absence of that, to your knowledge, are they disclosable?
no.
Okay, I'm moving further. Thank you.
I do have some follow-ups. So let me ask you this. Do you agree that honesty is an essential component of being a police officer?
Yes,
Do you believe that if a police officer does lie, that's a terminable offense?
that's my own personal opinion.
Okay.
If you want to ask me a specific other than my personal opinion, as
Well-
it relates to this, then I'll be,
Well, let me
it's my
ask
own
you.
personal opinion.
Sure. Let me ask you this. Are you aware of the Brady Doctrine that does require exculpatory information to be provided?
I am fully aware of the Brady Doctrine, as you know that I am from cases in other police departments.
Now, I just want to review specifically the police report, or the chief's report, which is Exhibit 1. So page Actually, it's, I think, exhibit 5?
Right.
Thank you, sorry about that. So,
5 is the employment account.
yeah,
4.
4.
4 is the
IA report.
memorandum from the chief.
Okay, so if we look at page 2, the only, the bottom paragraph under IBPO Representative Ed Kaczynski, the only thing that you take issue with is that you do not believe you told the police chief that Sergeant Trombley said he had him on tape.
That is correct.
Okay, the rest of the paragraph accurate?
It is accurate.
Okay. We turn to the next page, the first paragraph. Is that paragraph accurate?
Except for the point where it says to audio recording.
And the first paragraph, oh. So
Where it
it-
says on May 9th,
Yeah, so you dispute that the chief asked you, what did you understand? Did the chief ever ask you what your understanding of the term recording was?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I don't recall. I'm not
Okay.
gonna say I don't believe so. I don't remember that portion.
And that's the only point in that paragraph and the next one, where the chief
Correct.
says that he believes he asked you what you understood, which obviously, you know, you made it very clear, it was never defined by Mr. Trombley,
Correct.
but he recalls at least asking you what you understood when you said audio.
I don't
But that's the only part
That's
you
the-
don't
that's the
recall
only-
that.
That's the only part I don't remember.
Okay.
Don't recall.
Now, if an officer is making a statement about something in an internal investigation, like in this particular case, where he says, I did record you as a, not in terms of audio, but in terms of notes, it's your position that the police chief, in trying to verify that statement, does not have a right to that information?
If they're personal notes,
Even though the officer uses that as a statement for his defense?
once again, the personal notes are not taken in the course of his police duties. And as that was explained to Jason, and when I had my conversation with Attorney Met, that was the same verbiage that I gave to both.
Did the union ever write to the police chief to say that under MIRA, he has no, the town has no right to those notes?
At that point in time, Sergeant Trombley had already hired Attorney Met, and at that point in time, Attorney Met had taken over all involvement with Sergeant Trombley.
But am I correct that the union has never written to the town to inform them that under MIRA, they are not entitled to those notes?
No, we did not know.
Nothing further, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, in that same paragraph on page 3, the last sentence of the top, it's a new paragraph, where it says that you made it clear that the union was not supportive of such recordings. So are you saying that it goes on? I mean, as a captain in Cromwell, you testified that you would make recordings, and I can understand why someone would do that, but is it the union's position that they don't support officers doing this?
That was my personal take on that, for the same reason as to why we end up here.
And was there any point at which you asked Sergeant Trombley whether or not it was an audio recording or a handwritten or something other than that type of recording? Did you have a question in your mind that would make you ask him that, or you just assumed?
No.
Tell me what.
No, because when Sergeant Trombley told me about the recordings and what the recording was and what it was referenced to, I had a conversation with the chief in regarding those recordings and the possible officer that could be facing further discipline based upon what was written in that written warning. And once the chief assured me that there would be no further discipline to anyone else in the department, that ended it from a union perspective, because we had covered and made sure that all of the members were represented.
Counselor, do you have any other witnesses?
I do have other witnesses. No further questions for this witness.
No questions further, thank you.
The town would next call Gary Gray.
Officer Officer Gray, do you solemnly swear or solemnly or sincerely affirm, as in this case to be, that the evidence you shall give concerning this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God, and upon penalty of perjury?
I do.
Officer Gray, you're here under subpoena, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, Officer Gray, how long have you been a police officer with the Simsbury Police Department?
18 and a half years.
And do you currently hold a position in the union?
Yes, sir.
What-
Union president.
And how long have you held that position?
About 14 years.
Did you have a conversation with Ed Kaczynski where he relayed to you that Sergeant Trombley had made a statement about having recordings of the police chief making statements about Kevin Morano?
He told me that Jason had told him with the meeting with Sergeant Corcoran that the chief had made disparaging comments about Officer Russell and about Officer Morano. That was how it was relayed to me.
Is it your
I recall.
testimony that you don't recall Mr. Kaczynski saying that Mr. Trombley had said that he had recorded the chief?
I can't remember if he said recording. I don't remember if he used those exact words.
Did you relay to Lieutenant Sheehan the conversation you had with Mr. Kaczynski?
Yes.
And why did you contact Lieutenant Sheehan?
That was after, I believe, we all had met.
Meaning
there
you
were
had
other-
all,
I think there were other people in that room when I talked to Lieutenant Sheehan.
I'm sorry, who was in the
I
room?
think it was Sergeant Sagan, and I think also, I'm not sure, I think Sergeant Sagan and I were the two that were in the room at that time. I'm not sure if Ed was in that room or not.
But did there come a point in time where you and Sergeant Sagan approached Lieutenant Sheehan and reported this information that you had learned from Mr. Kaczynski?
Yes, it was, yes.
And the question is, why did you approach Lieutenant Sheehan with this information?
Because it had come to us that the chief had made disparaging remarks about those two individuals, and as union president, we felt to avoid a DFR that we needed to represent these two employees, to prevent the hostile work environment from going any further.
Did you ever make any requests in writing of any action you wanted the town to take on that information?
No.
Did you have a meeting with the police chief where you were interviewed as part of this internal investigation?
Yes, sir.
And was Lieutenant Sheehan present as well?
Yes, sir.
And during any point in that interview, did you state that you had at one point in time asked Sergeant Trombley if he had taped a conversation where he responded words to the effect, no, not that one?
Words to that effect, yes, but I also explained to Lieutenant Chief prior to us getting started that it was a long duration of time that had passed. I could not remember exactly word for word what had occurred. But yes, to paraphrase what I said, yes, Jason denied that he had taped the conversation.
And prior to tonight's hearing, did the police chief make available to you the recording of your interview if you wanted to listen
He
to it?
gave me a copy of it, the document.
And did you review that?
I did look at it, yes.
And at least as you described it to the police chief, you did convey to him that there had been a question you had posed to Sergeant Trombley where you had asked him, did you tape that one, using the word taped, correct?
I did use the word tape, correct. And Jason said no, he did not. It was in reference to the conversation about the chief making comments about Officer Russell and Officer Morano.
Mr. Chairman, can I just, did Sergeant Trombley say, and this is in Exhibit 4 again on page 11, no, not that one, another one?
I'm not sure if he said another
You
one or
don't know
not.
if those
And
were his
when I
words
talked
or
to the chief, I wasn't exactly sure exactly what the conversation was. My concern was that he denied taping it, because I was kind of disappointed because I felt if we had the tape of him making those comments, then we would take an action. Yes.
Okay.
I can't say for sure exactly what Sergeant Condon said. He did deny that he taped, and I used the word tape.
Thank you.
You mentioned that if you had a tape recording of the chief making those comments, the union would have taken action.
Then
Right?
we would have taken action, correct?
Have you ever asked Mr. Tremblay for his written recordings of the notes of that alleged
No, I
conversation?
did not.
If he had written notes of that conversation, as was reported to you, would the union take action?
Shortly after that time, he hired his own personal attorney. I had been in conversation with Ed about where to go with this after it came to our attention that the comments were made. And then shortly after that point, Jason hired Mr. Met as his attorney. So it was pretty much out of our hands.
Well, but I think what you told me was you approached Lieutenant Sheehan not on Mr. Tremblay's behalf, but on the behalf of
Officer Morano and Officer Russell.
Russell.
Correct, right.
and their concerns, if there are any, still remain, correct?
Well, there was discrepancies as to what was said and who had said what. Correct.
I mean, and Attorney Ment isn't representing Mr. Russell?
You're right.
Or,
Correct.
okay. As
Like I said, I
a,
was disappointed that there was no tape, because now it's his word against the chief's word. So I can't prove what was said.
to your knowledge, have any other police officers ever secretly taped any members of the police administration?
The demonstration, not the
Secretly.
administration, no.
Okay. As a police officer with of nearly 20 years, do you believe it's important for police officers to be honest?
For the most part, yes.
Do you believe it's ever appropriate to lie to a superior officer?
Not a superior officer.
Nothing further.
Counselor.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
You've had an opportunity to read this report or not?
Yes, I have. I don't have a copy with
And
me.
did you find anything that you didn't believe to be accurate?
Accuracy, no, because I wasn't privy to a lot of the interviews and things like that, so I don't know how accurate it is. I can just look at what I said.
And in terms of what you said,
It was pretty close to what I recall the conversation was. Like I said at the time, my concern was finding out if Jason had taped. I asked him, he said no, and I believed him. Like I said, I was a little disappointed.
okay. And do you have any familiarity with any incident here where you believe a police officer was dishonest and untruthful?
Yes, yeah.
Tell us about
Good
that.
question. There was a sergeant who had charges brought against him by another officer involving an incident that occurred in the locker room. That officer brought forth a complaint to the chief. There was an investigation that was done. During the investigation, it was learned that there were two other officers that had heard the conversation. So between the sergeant that was involved and the two other officers, it was, those three kind of contradicted what the original officer's comments and allegations were. So the investigation, what I was told was that it was this officer's perception of the conversation. But if that was a perception, then I'm looking at Jason's perception of recording versus the chief's perception of recording. If the chief is saying he's lying, then the individual that's involved in the other incident was lying.
That's Officer Russell.
I didn't name any names.
Okay. It's an incident involving Sergeant Sagan.
Correct,
And a weapon
correct,
and a perception.
correct.
And other people were involved in disputed what the officer had complained about.
Correct.
No action was taken against the officer.
There was action that I'm not privy to.
Okay, he's still employed.
He's still employed.
Okay, nothing further. Thanks for coming.
Yes, sir.
I have some follow-up. So just to be clear, the situation involving Officer Russell, he had made some statement to the effect that he was fearful about this act that
I didn't
happened.
see the report was not released.
But in terms of, you just testified that you understood there was a perception
There's a perception of what the conversation was between Officer Russell and Sergeant Sagan.
But the issue was, he had made some statement about how he was fearful, and other officers felt that perception was
I can only
inaccurate.
say what I heard through rumors and what, I did not see the report, the
What-
official report.
What's the specific statement that you believe was untruthful made by Officer Russell?
Officer Russell made a comment, and again, I'm only going by hearsay. I did not see the report, so I really don't want to answer that.
So sitting here today, you do not have knowledge of Officer Russell making a false statement.
Just by what the three officers I've heard from the three officers versus, what I've heard through rumors. No, I did not see the report, so no.
But, and you don't have firsthand knowledge of him actually making a false statement?
No.
Okay. But sitting here today, if Sergeant Trombley had said that other officers had in fact advised him to record the chief, when in fact nobody else did advise him to record the chief, how is that an issue
I
of
don't know if
perception?
that's truth or not.
But is that an issue of
Jason's
perception?
telling the truth, so I can look at the other fact that maybe the other officers didn't come forward with the total truth about the situation. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened with Sergeant Trombley and the officers on midnight shift. So I'm not going to second guess what really happened.
Okay, so if Officer Trombley said that he never made a statement where he said that he had a recording, however that term is used, of the chief making a comment about Officer Morano, that's not a statement of perception, is it?
No, I don't believe so, no.
I mean, you just heard Mr. Kaczynski testify.
I heard
That-
most of it, I didn't hear the whole thing.
Okay, so if he testified that in fact Mr. Trombley, Sergeant Trombley, had in fact said he had recorded the chief making an adverse comment about Mr. Morano, is there any reason you would believe that Mr. Kaczynski was not being truthful?
Like I said, I didn't hear all of Mr. Kaczynski's.
But if he had said that, is there any reason you can think
I
of that?
did
he
hear
would be-
that Mr. Kaczynski said that his perceptions of recording, he didn't ask Jason to clarify whether it was documented or if it was audio tape.
Right,
So
but
I'm
if,
not gonna second guess Mr. Kaczynski.
but if Mr. Trombley said he had
Sergeant
never
Trombley.
recorded, never made a statement recording the chief in any way, making a comment about Mr. Morano, but Mr. Kaczynski said he actually did tell me he recorded the chief making a statement about Morano, is there any reason to believe Mr. Kaczynski was
My understanding when
inaccurate?
Mr. Kaczynski testified was he didn't clarify whether it was audio taped or documented.
Right, that's not what I'm focusing on, is the Morano.
Mhm.
He testified, Mr. Kaczynski just testified, that Mr. Trombley
Mhm.
told him that he had a recording of the chief, whether it was written or audio, I'm not talking about that. He just testified that he
Okay.
had said he had a recording of the chief making a comment about Officer Morano,
Mhm.
okay? In fact, you just testified that's why you went to Lieutenant Sheehan.
Yes.
If, in fact, Mr. Trombley says, I never said that to anyone, that I had a recording of the police chief making an adverse statement about Mr. Morano, why is that an issue of perception and not a false statement of fact?
I'm believing what Jason has been saying about this. I have no reason not to believe him.
Is there a
I'm
reason?
looking at the fact of, we've had one incident where there was perception. We had three officers saying one thing happened, and a single officer said something else happened.
Have you ever had any personal experiences where Mr. Kaczynski has not been truthful?
No, I have not that I'm aware of, so he's
Okay.
always been honest with me as far as I know.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Any questions? Have any questions for the witness? Thank you.
We would next call Scott Sagan.
Sergeant, you solemnly swear, solemnly and sincerely affirm, as the case may be, the evidence you shall give concerning the case, this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God, or upon penalty of perjury. Thank you.
Sergeant, how long have you been a sergeant with the Simsbury Police Department?
I was promoted August 2018,
And how long have you been a police officer with the department?
October 2001.
So 18 years, right?
Yes.
Just over 18 years. You're here under subpoena, correct?
Yes.
As an officer of 18 years of service, have you served as a police officer anywhere else?
Yes. In 1998, I was hired by the Winstead Police Department, and I transferred here in '01.
Okay. So, well over, I'm not very good on my feet with math, close to 30 years of law enforcement experience?
No, we would say 21.
21. Oh, 21. I got it. Yeah. So 21 years of law enforcement experience. Do you believe it's important for police officers to be honest?
Yes.
And is that true when they're questioned by a superior officer?
Yes.
If you ask a subordinate officer a question, do you expect an honest answer?
Yes.
Did, were you here for Mr. Gray's testimony?
Yes.
He relayed a conversation where Mr. Kaczynski said that he conveyed to you and him that Mr. Trombley had told him that he had recorded the chief making a comment about Officer Morano.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, no, it's not. It was about Officers Morano and Russell.
And Russell, so both of them, so not just Morano, it was also
Correct.
Russell. And did you and Mr. Gray then approach Lieutenant Sheehan and speak to him about that information you had received?
After speaking with Mr. Kaczynski? Yes.
And why was it that you approached Lieutenant Sheehan?
If I recall the day, Chief wasn't in. Officer Gray, as the union president, just got word that there was reportedly some disparaging remarks made in regards to two other union members. In the chief's absence, I believe Lieutenant Sheehan was the only person here, and Officer Gray, in his capacity as the union president, asked questions or told Lieutenant Sheehan something to the effect of, during the preparation of defending their grievance or fighting their grievance, we learned this information, and was there any merit to it, up to and including that Jason had documented or recorded the conversation.
Have you ever seen any of these documents or recordings of this conversation where the chief supposedly made a disparaging comment about Officer Morano or Russell?
No.
Were you interviewed as part of the internal investigation?
I was.
And during that interview, were you, did you give testimony that you were present for a conversation between Gary Gray and Sergeant Trombley where Mr. Gray asked him if he had ever taped the police chief?
Yes.
And do you recall Officer Gray using the word tape?
I do, and I remember it specifically because during the entire onset of this investigation and the subsequent IA, I never heard the word taped. Not through the rumor mill, not from Jason directly. The word tape recording never came out of anybody's mouth, especially Sergeant Trombley's. I never heard rumor of tape recordings. I've never heard, it was simply he had recordings. So when, as part of the executive board, we often talk about many things in the sergeant's office. It's the most private place in the building. So I was at my workstation, at my desk, and Sergeant Trombley and Gary Gray, they were discussing all union matters, pending pension negotiations, CBAs, things in that nature. I didn't excuse myself from the conversation. I was just no longer part of it, so I was working at my workstation. And that's when Officer Gray specifically asked him, they were talking about the allegations that the chief said something disparaging about Officers Russell and Morano. And Gary Gray said to Jason, oh, did you tape that conversation? And the reason I remember that so specifically is I'd never heard that word tape being used. So I actually turned in my chair, and Sergeant Trombley simply responded something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing because I wasn't part of the conversation, something to the effect of, no, I didn't record that conversation.
Do you recall him during that particular conversation ever mentioning that he recorded the chief via written notes he had taken? At that
At
time?
that conversation,
Yeah.
no.
No further questions.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.